18 points. That's not a close game that got away. That's not a lucky night where the shots fell and the other team went cold. That's a demolition. And the team doing the demolishing, they were missing two of their rotation players, suiting up two athletes who had spent most of the last year fighting their own bodies just to get back on the floor, and walking into a building that belongs to the team every analyst in this league had already penciled in as 2026 WNBA champions before a single regular season game tipped off. The New York Liberty, Jonquel Jones, Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu, a roster so loaded that the championship conversation around them wasn't really a conversation at all. It was a foregone conclusion. Analysts were treating the 2026 title as paperwork waiting to be signed, a formality. And then Indiana walked into Barclays Center in Brooklyn and handed them an 18-point loss, 109-91. Without Aaliyah Boston, without Lexi Hall, with Caitlin Clark and Sophie Cunningham playing their first meaningful basketball in months, both of them still in the process of proving to themselves and everyone watching that what their bodies went through in 2025 was actually behind them. What happened in Brooklyn wasn't just a preseason result you file away and forget. It was a signal. A loud, unmistakable signal about where the power structure of this league might actually be heading. And if you've been waiting to find out whether this Indiana roster was genuinely rebuilt or just rebuilt on paper, you're about to get your answer. Let's start where the real story begins, not at Barclays Center, but in the months before it. Because a lot of the coverage around Caitlin Clark's return has glossed over just how brutal 2025 actually was, and you can't fully appreciate what she did in Brooklyn without understanding what she had to climb out of first. Clark played 13 games in 2025, not 13 strong games before a precautionary late-season shutdown, not 13 while managing some minor issue that kept her at reduced minutes, 13 total. Because every time she started getting right, something else sent her back to the training room while the season kept moving forward without her. The quad went first. Before she ever got properly back from that, the ankle compounded the problem. And then in July, when whatever momentum she had managed to build was still fragile, a groin injury finished off what remained of her season entirely. 3 separate problems, each one interrupting a recovery that was already underway, each one resetting the clock on a comeback that kept getting delayed before it could stick. That kind of injury progression creates a specific form of psychological damage that a single serious injury simply doesn't. When you go down once, the path back is painful, but it's linear. You know what you're recovering from. You can see the finish line, even if it's far away. But when you come back and get sent back, come back and get sent back, over and over across an entire season, something happens to the way you process your own body. Every movement becomes a question. Every step carries a quiet doubt underneath it that you can't just decide your way out of. Physical clearance and mental clearance are 2 completely separate milestones, and athletes frequently reach physical readiness long before they've rebuilt genuine trust in their own body under competitive conditions. You cannot simply decide to trust a quad that kept failing you. You cannot push off an ankle you spent weeks protecting and expect the hesitation to disappear overnight just because the medical staff signed off on your return. That was what Clark was walking back from when she stepped onto Barclays Center. Sophie Cunningham's road back looked different on the surface, but it was just as demanding in ways that don't always show up on injury reports. Her MCL tear in 2025 was a full stop, not a managed situation, not a "we're being cautious" timeline. The answer to when she was coming back was simply not in 2025, season over, no ambiguity. And while that kind of clean ending removes some of the psychological cycle Clark went through, an MCL tear does something specific to a shooter's mechanics that extends well beyond the recovery window itself. It rewires the fundamental movement patterns that basketball requires: how you plant your foot coming off a screen, how you cut toward the ball, how you load your legs before releasing a rhythm 3. Every single one of those actions runs directly through the knee you spent the better part of a year rehabilitating. Cunningham's entire offensive game is built on exactly those movements. She lives on the arc, coming off curls, catching and firing before a defensive closeout can arrive. That requires her knee to respond instantly and without any compensating hesitation. The moment she starts protecting it, consciously or not, the timing breaks down. The shot gets late, the release point changes, and for a shooter whose value comes almost entirely from the efficiency and speed of that catch and fire action, a knee that responds even slightly slower than it should isn't a minor inconvenience, it's a fundamental problem. She spent the better part of a year retraining that knee to do exactly what she was asking of it. When she posted before tip-off in Brooklyn saying she had been dying to say it was finally game day and that feeling healthy felt enormous, that wasn't standard preseason excitement. That was 11 months of rehabilitation work trying to speak for itself. So here's what actually happened when Clark stepped onto that floor. Coach Stephanie White had watched her through every stage of the recovery process, and what she said post-game is worth paying attention to carefully. By the time the 2026 preseason arrived, something about Clark had shifted. The joy was visible from the sideline. Not the cautious, testing herself with every possession version of a player still working back to full confidence. The genuine, playing freely version that tells everyone watching that the process is actually complete. The moment that made it real, the moment that turned the recovery from a narrative into a confirmed fact, wasn't a statistic, it was a floater. If you know basketball well enough to read what specific shots tell you about a player's body, you understand why a floater is such a precise diagnostic. It requires the quad to fire correctly. The ankle needs to be fully stable. The momentum has to be controlled through the release, and the timing has to hold all the way through. It's among the first things that disappears when a player's body isn't fully cooperating, and Clark's floater dropped clean. From there, 17 minutes, 7 points, 4 assists, 3 rebounds, 0 turnovers. The Liberty came in with full court pressure specifically designed to force quick decisions and bad passes from a player who hadn't competed at this level since her injury spiral shut her down. They built their defensive scheme around the idea that Clark would be vulnerable, that the rust would show up in the moments when the game sped up and the reads had to come fast. She gave them nothing. 0 turnovers against a scheme built to generate exactly that. Not one bad decision under pressure. Not one moment where the full court trap got her feet moving before her mind caught up. A player returning from this kind of extended layoff typically plays one of two ways. Either she pulls back cautiously, protecting herself, making the conservative play every time to avoid the mistake that sends her back to the bench, or she pushes aggressively to prove she's back, forcing shots in situations that aren't quite there yet. Clark did neither. She ran the offense, found the correct play each time down the floor, never once got sped up by the pressure New York was throwing at her. That's not just physical health, that is processing clarity. That is a player who came back completely. And then she hit the step-back pull-up deep three. That particular shot was the quiet fear that nobody wanted to say out loud, the fear that the deep pull-up range might not come back fully clean after months of protecting a bad ankle and managing a sore quad. It dropped. Indiana's fan base exhaled everywhere at once. She finished 1 for 5 from deep overall, but she noted post-game that her misses were running long. Her legs are fully under her. She's simply recalibrating her feel for distance, which is precisely what you want to hear from a shooter in week 1 of her return. The legs are there, the range is there, the fine-tuning is just a matter of repetitions. Now here's where the context of this win needs to be properly established, because the result only fully lands when you understand who Indiana beat and in what circumstances. The New York Liberty entered 2026 with a roster that ends most preseason debates before they start. Multiple analysts had already written them in as champions before the preseason even opened. Jonquel Jones, Breanna Stewart, Sabrina Ionescu. The length, the talent, the defensive awareness, on paper, they had answers to almost everything. Indiana walked into their building, their home floor in Brooklyn, and did it short-handed.
Aaliyah Boston managing a lower leg issue, not in uniform, Lexi Hall dealing with hamstring tightness, watching from the bench instead of contributing minutes. White confirmed post-game that both would have suited up if the game counted in the standings. It didn't. So Indiana went into Barclays Center with a shorter rotation, 2 injured returners playing their first competitive minutes in months, and still won by 18.
The bench scored 62 points against the New York Liberty, against a team specifically constructed with the length and defensive intelligence to make 62 bench points feel like a theoretical number rather than something that actually happens in a real game. That total isn't a small sample size quirk you rationalize away. It's a statement about the depth of this roster that doesn't have an easy counterargument. Before Barclays Center, the 2026 championship conversation started and ended in New York. After this game, Indiana is a legitimate part of that discussion, and it takes real intellectual effort to argue otherwise. Sophie Cunningham's contribution deserves its own careful examination because it was almost entirely buried under the Clark return narrative, and that's a mistake. 14 points, 13 minutes, 3 three-pointers. If you understand what an MCL tear actually does to a shooter's mechanics at the structural level, those numbers translate into something considerably larger than a strong preseason performance. Less than a year before she stood on that floor at Barclays Center, Cunningham's knee had a structural tear in it. And then she went out and hit 3 clean threes against a Liberty defense that came in with length and defensive intelligence specifically designed to contest exactly those kinds of perimeter shots. The first one dropped clean, the second one dropped clean, the third one dropped clean. Each made shot was a physical confirmation in real time that the retraining she put in since January actually held when it was tested against live competition. The foot planted correctly, the load came without hesitation, the release fired on time. Everything her knee needed to do in that moment, it did, 3 times. Clark's return dominated every broadcast intro, every social media post, every pre-game narrative leading into tip-off, understandably. But while everyone was watching Clark, Cunningham went out and tied for the team scoring lead in 13 minutes off the bench. That's what a complete, healthy Sophie Cunningham looks like on a defense that had a specific plan to stop her. Opposing coaches who came into this preseason with a "she's still working back" assumption about Cunningham's knee need to update their scouting reports immediately. The supporting cast that showed up in Brooklyn tells the rest of the story about what this Indiana roster actually is. Kelsey Mitchell posted 18 points on 7 of 12 shooting in 17 minutes. Not hunting shots, not pressing the game to manufacture opportunities, making the right play repeatedly, letting the points arrive naturally from a system that rewards correct decisions rather than volume hunting. That's a specific kind of offensive intelligence that teams spend years trying to build into their culture, and Mitchell is running it at a high level. Shaquilla Walker-Kimbrough also finished with 18, but her most significant contribution came during the fourth quarter. Indiana went on a 21-4 run in the fourth that ended whatever remaining drama there was about the final score. Walker-Kimbrough's scoring in that stretch didn't come from isolation creation or manufactured looks. It came from Indiana's defensive pressure converting Liberty possessions into transition opportunities, with Walker-Kimbrough filling the lane and finishing what the defense created. That's a different kind of scoring than just getting hot. It's a player functioning inside a system that generates the opportunities before she ever touches the ball. Raven Johnson requires her own section because what she produced in 17 minutes of floor time speaks directly to the structural question every opposing coach will be asking about Indiana this season. 8 assists. Her length, and this is a precise biomechanical reality, not just a general compliment, physically converts New York's half-court sets into Indiana transition opportunities before the Liberty even processes that the ball is gone. Standard-sized guards access certain passing lanes. Johnson accesses different ones, longer ones, earlier ones. And when Clark sits, Johnson runs the second unit at the same pace and the same defensive intensity. The tempo doesn't drop, the pressure doesn't ease, Indiana doesn't reset and wait for things to settle, they just keep going. Michaela Onyenwere added 11 points off the bench. And then there's Justine Pafford, a 6'4" shooter still working her way into a full role, who put up 8 points, while flashing perimeter range that creates a very specific defensive problem in pace and space systems. When you're 6'4" and you can pull up from deep, opposing defenses have to assign a perimeter-capable defender to someone they would normally try to body up or switch under. When Indiana runs multiple players of that size and range simultaneously on the arc, the defensive rotations multiply in complexity with each action. Opposing coaches now have to add Pafford to their preparation in a way they didn't have to before this game. That's a concrete roster development, not just a box score curiosity.
Pull back now and look at what Indiana's system actually produced over 40 minutes against a team that was supposed to have answers for all of it. 32 points in the first quarter, 29 transition points generated directly from 24 New York turnovers, 8 blocks as a team. The Liberty came in with a full-court pressure scheme specifically designed to disrupt Indiana's offensive flow and force Clark into uncomfortable early decisions. Instead, Indiana's active defense converted the New York half-court possessions into fast breaks so consistently that the Liberty were scrambling to keep up by the end of the first half. The scheme built to disrupt Indiana became the thing that Indiana used to generate their own offense. Monique Billings was a specific mechanical reason the front court could run at that speed. She and Walker Kimbrough aren't traditional bigs who secure a rebound and wait for the play to develop around them. Billings runs the floor rim to rim, and her hands are clean enough that Clark can deliver the ball to her in full stride without slowing the transition pace to let her catch up. 9 points, 7 rebounds. The Clark to Billings connection in transition gave Indiana an early offensive rhythm that the Liberty's defensive rotations never consistently disrupted. That's a different kind of front court than most teams are assembling right now, and it showed up clearly in what the final score said. This is where Stephanie White's stated tactical vision stops being a preseason talking point and becomes a visible, real structure. The Liberty game was the first external test of whether the personnel she assembled could actually execute that vision for 40 minutes against real competition. They executed it so thoroughly that the team on the other side of it is now going back to film, trying to figure out how to slow it down. Here's what should actually concern the Liberty and every other team watching film from Barclays Center as they go back to prepare. The Indiana roster that beat them by 18 points wasn't at full strength. That's not a minor footnote. That's the central fact about what this result means going forward. Aaliyah Boston will return into a rotation that already functioned at a high level without her. Lexi Hall will add another floor spacer, capable of running in transition and stretching the defense from the wing in exactly the way pace and space systems need. Indiana's offense doesn't change when those two return, it deepens. The system White built doesn't have a slow gear, and it's not yet operating with its full complement of personnel. What the Liberty saw at Barclays Center was Indiana's floor. The ceiling hasn't been fully revealed yet.
Think about what that means concretely. The bench scored 62 points in this version of the roster. Clark produced 0 turnovers in 17 minutes under a defensive scheme built specifically to generate exactly that. Cunningham hit 3 threes off the bench in her first real game back from a structural knee tear. Raven Johnson made the Liberty's half-court offense look disorganized from the guard position. And none of that required Boston. None of it required Hall. The full version of this team is still being assembled, and the incomplete version just handled the predetermined champions by double digits in their own building. The conversation around the 2026 WNBA season changed at Barclays Center. Not slightly, not in the nuanced, well, Indiana is interesting way that analysts use when they're not quite ready to commit to something. The conversation changed in the kind of way that demands a reconsideration of everything that had been assumed before the game tipped off. Before Brooklyn, analysts had the 2026 WNBA championship in New York. The Liberty roster was the answer to every question the league was asking. Indiana was a team to watch, an interesting development, a story worth following, not a championship-level threat, not yet. After Brooklyn, Indiana is a legitimate championship-level threat, and the version of Indiana that just proved that is missing 2 starters. 2 preseason games remain before the regular season opens and everything starts counting. April 30th at home against Dallas, then May 2nd against the Nigeria women's national team. Each one is another opportunity for Clark and Cunningham to build competitive rhythm, for White to sharpen the rotations that will matter in a 7-game playoff series, and for this group to develop the chemistry that separates a talented roster from a genuinely cohesive one. Every possession, every defensive sequence, every late-game situation worked through in a preseason setting is a brick in the foundation of what Indiana is trying to build by June. The question this game answered is no longer whether Indiana can compete at the championship level. That question is settled. The question this game opened is one that the rest of the league is now going to spend the entire regular season trying to answer. How far does this roster go when every player is healthy, the games count, and the pressure is real? Nobody had that question on their radar 6 months ago. They do now.